Last week we saw in the previous section, Mark chapter 2, verse 23 to verse 28, the end of chapter 2, that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath and that He gives the Sabbath to His people for rest. Sabbath was made for man, He says. He, as the Lord of the Sabbath, gives rest. He offers rest. In fact, He calls people to come to Him to find rest. We see that in Matthew chapter 11, the end of Matthew 11. We see this in the context of the Pharisees who had taken the day of the Sabbath and made it into something completely different, had made it into a day of slavery, a day of being bound by regulations that God had never given regarding the Sabbath. In the shorter catechism we saw last week that the Westminster divines, those who wrote the Westminster Confession and Catechisms, understood this day as a day to be spent in holy resting all that day, except for so much as is to be taken up in works of necessity and mercy. In other words, it is a day that is to be spent in rest, but with some exception. Now, in one sense, we have to say that the Catechism is glorious on this point, to show us the purpose of the Sabbath. We have to say that it so clearly tells us what the Sabbath is about. And in one sense, there is almost a kind of a lack of clarity when we think about what the day is for. The day, the Sabbath, is made for man. And these exceptions should not be understood as kind of breaking the rest, but actually as enhancing the rest. The exceptions, doing works of necessity and mercy, really show something of what it means to rest. They show us what the day is for. And in our passage, that is exactly what we see. And let me be clear, we do not see in this passage in any clear way the word necessity, works of necessity. That is something that we can talk about maybe afterwards or at another time. I do believe that it is biblical. But in this passage, the focus is on works of mercy. Jesus shows us that the Sabbath is for works of mercy. Resting, holy resting all that day. Perhaps we could even say by works of necessity and works of mercy, doing good to others. Again, this comes in a confrontation with the Pharisees. This final section, the high point of this confrontation, it began in the beginning of chapter 2 when Jesus read the minds of the Pharisees, knowing what they had in their hearts, that they would not believe him when he had said to a man, "Your sins are forgiven," and they were grumbling in their hearts, saying, "Who is this that he claims to be able to forgive sins? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And now Jesus again reads their minds. He knows their thoughts. He knows the intentions of their hearts. Again, I'm not going to give you any headings for this section, but I give you some idea of where the passage is going. In verse 1 and 2, the Pharisees miss the point of the Sabbath again, or even further, and they actually observe Jesus instead of observing the Sabbath. In verse 3 to 5, Jesus illustrates what the Sabbath is for by healing, by doing good. And then in verse 6, the Pharisees respond in an ironic way, wishing to do Jesus harm, to kill Jesus, to destroy Jesus. So beginning in verse 1 and 2. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. So Mark is setting the scene again. Remember that Mark's gospel unfolds almost in a drama-like way, almost like a play on a stage. And now we have the next scene. They just had the scene on the Sabbath where the disciples of Jesus were plucking the heads of grain and rolling them in the hands and eating them. And the Pharisees confronting Jesus about them working on the Sabbath by doing so, ending with Jesus saying that I am the Lord of the Sabbath and that I give rest on this day. That is what the day was for. And now it's again Sabbath. It might be the next week or it might be the same day. Mark is not clear on that. That is not really the question. It's possible that they were going through the fields of grain to come to the synagogue. And now they are at the synagogue, and there was a man with a withered hand. Now, we don't know exactly what it means that he had a withered hand, except that the idea that the people had of his hand was that it dried up, almost like a plant that had died. It was useless. It was shrunken. It was unusable. Now, we perhaps see something that resembles this in a person who have had a stroke, perhaps, and the limb or the hand or a part of the arm becomes useless. It's stuck in one position and it can't move. Now, it could have been anything, but that's the idea that we have to have of this man's hand. Now, it wasn't life-threatening. There's no indication that this man's life was in danger, and this becomes important later on in the passage. See, Jesus could have waited to heal this man the next day, or gone to do it at another point. It wasn't life-threatening. It wasn't something to necessarily deal with immediately, and yet, as we'll see, Jesus does. And so there's this man in the synagogue with the withered hand. But the focus is on the Pharisees in verse 2. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. See, the Pharisees, they watched Jesus. The word is they watched him. They observed him. They are keeping a close eye. You see that Mark is very sharp at this point. He uses irony. And he uses this word, the word that says that they were watching Jesus, really observing Jesus, paying close attention to him, a word that could just as well be used, and in fact is used, of observing the Sabbath day. Perhaps you heard in our reading of the law that in the Deuteronomy passage, the translation uses the word observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But also in the New Testament, this word is often used in exactly that way, of the commandments in general and of the Sabbath. In fact, in a passage very similar to this one, in John chapter 9, verse 16, the Pharisees accuse Jesus of not observing this very same word, of not observing the Sabbath day. But look at the Pharisees. They stand condemned even at the very beginning of this passage because they are observing Jesus instead of observing the Sabbath day. You see, they know this man in the synagogue. They are aware of him. In fact, that's precisely why they are there. They know that there is a man who is in need of healing, and they know that Jesus is going to be there, and they expect him to do something about this man's plight, that they expect him to heal the man. And so they're not there to worship God. They're not there to hear the exposition of the word. They are there to see whether Jesus would fall into a trap by healing this man on the Sabbath. But by doing this, they show something, or at least Mark shows us something of their hearts, of where their thoughts are. They observe Jesus instead of the Sabbath. That's such a sad state of heart, a sad state of mind and heart to see in these people, these Pharisees. And yet we must be eager to consider ourselves as well. You see, in our day, this exists as well. If you go to many universities and Christian schools, specifically not Christian schools, but Christian centers of education in terms of higher education, and you go to the theology faculties and you begin to ask questions around there, you soon find that many of those theologians, so-called theologians, actually read the New Testament in order to find fault with Jesus, to find fault with God. They accuse God. They accuse Jesus of being short of their standard. And this is exactly what the Pharisees do. So this exists in our own day. And in one sense, to put it like that, still puts it far away from us. We could ask the question, why do we come to church? Well, hopefully that's not the purpose. Hopefully we don't come to church to find fault with God, or to find fault with the word, or with even the preacher who brings the word. Hopefully that is really not our purpose. But in one sense, we have to be very careful, because sometimes when we read the word, perhaps especially when we read the law, we listen to it that way. We actually put the law, or God himself, the giver of the law, into the position of the accused. You see, it's a very nice way to excuse ourselves from the standard of God's law, because we stand guilty before it. But if we can say, well, he doesn't live up to my standard either, then we have excused ourselves to some extent. Now, for me to go further on this point and make it more specific would run the risk of getting into all kinds of things. But there are many, many things where we read the word and where it does not fit with our own system of understanding, where we think that I know better than what the word clearly teaches. And we need to be very careful of not doing this ourselves. But Jesus, in response to the Pharisees, we might expect that Jesus would hold back at this point. And Jesus he's been fairly secretive. He's told the demons to keep quiet about who he is. He's told people to keep quiet. And we might expect that he would shrink back a little bit. Maybe just withhold at this point. But he doesn't. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And he has intended the Sabbath for the good of his people. He is not at this point going to shrink back in any way. In fact, Jesus will make it clear, even at the cost to himself, that would ultimately cost him his life, because the Sabbath is central to the reasons why the Pharisees ultimately plot to kill him, as we see in this passage. Jesus is intent on showing that this is for the good of his people. He's not going to shy away from this. And so in verse 3, Jesus says to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." Now actually the translation says "come here." It's very appropriate to say "come here," but you have to see the picture of the synagogue and then hear the literal meaning of the words there. Jesus says to the man, "Come to the middle. Come stand in the center." So the people were gathered around, and there was something of a circle of people in the synagogue. They didn't usually have benches or a pew like we have, and everyone looking to the front. And if it were that way, then he would likely have said to the man, "Come to the front." He says to him, "Come to the center." There's a circle of people gathering around, and Jesus is somewhere close to the center. And he says to this man, who was up to this point seemingly unaware of what goes on, he wasn't asking Jesus for healing. In fact, he perhaps even is trying to avoid the attention. Jesus says to him, "Come, you, the man with the withered hand, come stand in the center. Come into our midst. Come stand in the middle." And Jesus brings this man to the front, or to the center. And Jesus said to the Pharisees, Jesus brings the man to the center. He already knows exactly how this is going to play out. And he says to the Pharisees, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And just listen to Jesus' question. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or harm, to save life or to kill? He gives them two options, two phrases, each saying essentially the same thing. Do good or harm, to save life or to kill. Now, in one sense, this question is the absolute essential rhetorical question. And you know that a rhetorical question is not a question for which there is no answer. It's a question for which the answer is so clear that you do not have to give the answer. Yeah, that's a rhetorical question. Not one that doesn't have an answer, but one in which everyone who hears the question knows the answer already. And so if I were to ask you this question, perhaps not in this setting, but in a more informal setting, and ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm? Is it lawful on the Sabbath to kill or to save? What would you say? Well, you wouldn't have to answer. We all instinctively know that it is lawful on every day of the week, and perhaps especially so on the Sabbath, to do good and to save. It is never lawful to harm and to kill, to murder. It's never acceptable. And so Jesus' question doesn't allow the Pharisees much wiggle room. And they can't go this way or that way. And they're now in a very tight pinch, because if they agree to what is so obvious in the question and say, well, obviously you have to do good on the Sabbath, then Jesus would be right to heal the man, and the accusation would fall flat. If, on the other hand, they were to say what is clearly absurd, now on the Sabbath you should actually murder and do harm, then they would be exposed. And so they don't choose. They don't actually give an answer, which is even worse. They fail to answer. They just keep quiet. They just say nothing. They were silent. Now you have to understand also that they would be silent. What could they say? Jesus had read their minds. Jesus knew what they were there for. He knew that they were there to accuse him. They knew that they were seeking to show that he is a man who disobeys the Sabbath. I mean, he had showed that he is a man who disregards their view of Sabbath in just the previous section, perhaps that very morning, if not that morning, then the previous week or in the recent history for them. And so they know what he's going to do. He's going to heal this man. But Jesus exposes their falsehood. He exposes their lie by this question. So they refuse to give an answer. They just keep quiet. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. It's such a chilling thing to think about Jesus, the Son of God, the Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of hosts, looking around in these men's faces with anger for them. Jesus is angered at them. See, we do not read many passages where we are told that Jesus was angry. But Jesus was angry at these men. We don't have to speculate about why. We know why he was angry at them. It was because of their inability to realize what his day was for. And not only inability to realize, but their understanding of this day and what they had made of this day and how they had robbed God's people of having this day for their good. He had said to them, the Sabbath is for man. He told them this just in the previous section. The Sabbath is for mercy, for helping others, for serving, for caring for the needy. Just consider how this is told in the Old Testament, how this is taught in the Old Testament. The purposes of the Sabbath, Isaiah 58, verse 13 and the beginning of verse 14. God tells his people, if you turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight and a holy day of the Lord, honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, or seeking your own pleasure or talking idly, then you shall take delight in the Lord. If you seek that which is truly delightful on the day, doing what is good on the day, then the Lord will take delight in you. The Pharisees knew this. The Pharisees knew that the day of the Sabbath was a day of delighting. But they had robbed the people of this by not allowing them to move an inch to the right or to the left for fear of transgressing the Sabbath. When in fact the Sabbath was made for them to be a day of delight, to be a day of seeking God's will for that day. Thinking, how can I do this day more to God's glory? What is it that God would want me to do on this day? What is the most pleasurable thing that I can do, not to gain my own pleasure, but God's glory? And that should become my pleasure in this day. See, the day is not for doing all that we please. That is not the intent of the day. The intent of the day is to delight in the Lord, to delight in His word, in His promises, in the salvation that He offers, and in His power to create and to give life. But the Pharisees missed this point. They made it into a day of idleness, a day of sitting around and doing nothing, a day in which you were not even allowed to do good to people in need. Christ shows us so clearly what the day is for. The day is a day for mercy, a day for doing good, not to harm, but to do good, not to kill, but to save. Loving and caring for God's people, helping the needy. But Jesus' anger does turn to grieving very quickly. He's deeply saddened. And this again, we are given a very clear indication of why. Why is He sad? Because the hardness of their hearts. Because they had hardened their hearts. They had refused the information that the Scriptures taught them about the Sabbath. You just think about how hard their hearts must have been in order not to be able to answer Jesus' question. A question that has such a clear and easy answer. Of course we have to do good. And they refuse to answer this question because their hearts are hardened. And this doesn't even show yet how far they had gone, how far they were gone. We will only see that when we come to verse 6. So Jesus shows them what the day is for. He shows everyone, He shows us what the day is for. It's a day for mercy. And so He says to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man's hand is restored. Again, Jesus' ability to heal this man is just beyond our imagination. In fact, when you read the passage, it sounds like Jesus' command to the man to stretch out his hand is the command that heals the hand, but there's no healing command. He doesn't say to the hand, be healed. He just says to the man, stretch out your hand. Something he might well not have been able to do before. Jesus doesn't even have to work in order to accomplish this healing. He just says, stretch out your hand. The assumption is that Jesus has the creative power in order to bring this man's hand back to wellness, to health, and to life. And so the man stretches out his hand for all to see that Jesus is indeed able to create life from something that is dead. Jesus is able to perform works of mercy on the Sabbath. And again, when we think about this, we must think about our own attitudes toward the Sabbath. Do we think of it as a day that is there for our pleasure and our gratification? No, it's a day to rejoice in God's mercy to us. A day to be overjoyed at receiving the good and the merciful from God's hand. See, that is why God brings us to worship, to tell us again of His great promises, of His great saving acts, His great works of redemption. To read in the Old Testament and in the New Testament of how God is a God who brought His people out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Yes, you were a slave, and we ourselves were slaves to sin. And the Lord just shows that again and again as we read the law. We are slaves to sin unless we are set free by Christ, who shows us mercy. You know, mercy means that He bows down Himself to our position of need, and He addresses our need. And in doing that, He shows us grace, forgiveness for sins, taking away what we have transgressed against God, and instead giving us what is truly good, bringing us to life. And so it's a day to do good, a day for us being so overjoyed at this great work of salvation that God has done for us that we begin to do good to others as well. It's not a day that we must sit around doing nothing. It's a day for feasting. It's a day for hospitality. A day for enjoying fellow Christians and perhaps even non-Christians' company. and rejoicing at the good work that God has done for us in salvation. The Pharisees fail miserably. They don't only fail to see this, but they go in an entirely opposite direction. So in verse 6 we see their response. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. What an irony. Again, another irony. Jesus asked the question, what is appropriate to do on this day? To save a life or to take a life? To save or to kill? To do good or to do harm? And in their hardness of heart, they not only failed to answer his question, but on this day on which they were supposed to observe the Sabbath, but were instead observing him in order to find fault with him, they not only don't find fault with him because they can't, because he is faultless, he's spotless, he's without sin, they still turn around and go and plot to kill him on the Sabbath day. On the Sabbath day, they go out of church, they go out of the synagogue, and they begin to plan how it can be, how can they find a way to destroy Jesus. Now perhaps one question that we might have is why the Herodians, who are they, what are they? They were likely a political party that at just this point had their desires align with the Pharisees. They were otherwise not aligned, but in this point they were. You see, the Pharisees wanted to kill Jesus over the Sabbath. The Herodians wanted to kill Jesus for political reasons. But now they just begin to conspire together. Now by doing this, Mark, by showing us this and telling us about this, Mark hints to us where the story is going. And one preacher has said that the Gospels are all passion narratives, narratives of the suffering of Jesus with extended introductions. You think about the Gospels, you have 8 or 9 or 10 chapters leading up to the cross. He says all of those chapters are really just extended introductions. What is central to the Gospels is the death and resurrection of Christ. That is where this book, the Gospel of Mark, is headed. Jesus must ultimately die, even though he has no sin, even though he is one who extends mercy upon mercy, who brings life by his death. It is precisely by his death that he brings life, which is the greatest irony of all. Jesus brings us life even when we kill him. Now this section in Mark is the high point, at this point, the high point of the Pharisees' confrontations with Jesus. They've made up their minds. Everything is clear now. And so we begin to see the direction. Jesus is on his way to the cross. Now much must still happen, much must still be taught. Jesus must still teach his disciples many things. But we begin to see very clearly the identity, ministry, and majesty of Jesus. We see that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, the rest giver. That is who he is, his identity. We see his ministry, that he has come to preach the gospel and to do good, to show and proclaim mercy to the lost and to the needy. But we also see his majesty. We see how he is responded to. We see how he is supposed to be worshipped and honored and glorified, and yet, time and again, he is rejected and despised and ultimately killed. So how about us? How do we respond to Jesus? Will we submit to his great design for the fourth commandment? Will we submit to what he requires of us in rejoicing on this great day that he gives to remind us of his great saving acts? To rejoice in a day that he delights to show mercy and to do good. See, the Sabbath really is a life and death matter. It is a day on which life is promised through Christ. And Jesus is this very night offering you life to come to Him and receive His mercy and submit to His good designs in His law. Amen.